Welcome back to the Real Football Show. I'm Ryan Lamb, your host, and today I have with me another friend of mine, Benjamin Ferree. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Ryan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. So let's talk some Leicester because they have been a little bit disappointing toward the end, to put it quite simply. I have free fallen written in reviews. So what are your thoughts about kind of of course after the lockdown, Leicester kind of just really struggled and actually dropped out of the Champions League spot. So what are your thoughts on all of that and having that squad that was really good to start and then kind of dwindled out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to kind of go back to like the start of the Premier League season, I mean, I wasn't too shocked that Leicester was up in those Champion League places, especially right away. I mean, their preseason, they were absolutely fantastic. And this is going back all the way to last year now. They beat Atalanta in a preseason game at home. And like it just seemed like everything was working. Brendan Rodgers came in, and when he came in at the end of the year, and the previous year, he came in lots of points right away. The team seemed re-energized. It seemed like everything was going well. There seemed to be no real problems. That just continued right into the Premier League season. And they got off to about as hot of a start as you can. But then cracks kind of started to show. And really, I mean, everyone points right at the lockdown. And it came not at a great time for Leicester. They were starting to kind of show those cracks there right before that lockdown. They were just teams started, instead of coming out and attacking Leicester before Leicester could hit them on a counterattack or break them down from there, they said, we're going to sit back and we're going to let you beat us and let you break us down. We're going to let you play balls into the middle and see if you can beat us that way. And Leicester just didn't have the players to do that on a consistent basis in the Premier League. And then coming back from the break, they just couldn't put it together. There was just a real lack of team play continuity wise, just couldn't hold possession of the ball enough, just weren't real confident either. And I mean, I don't really know what exactly to point that to, whether it was necessarily there's no fans in the stands. I mean, when your team who's not necessarily at the same level or has the same players as like a Liverpool, Man City, fans obviously help you in times. So I don't know if that was part of it as well, was the lack of intensity, but it just kind of seemed like overall there was a lack of just that intensity of that the job almost felt done. And it really should have been done for Leicester to finish in the Champions League spot. But just after disappointing result, ended up falling just short of the Champions League spot. But overall, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it might kind of be a blessing that Leicester didn't end up in one of those Champions League spots. And which I know that might seem a little weird, but back into Europe again at the Europa League, a little less big of a stage. The quality of play is obviously not as big. And based on how Leicester kind of finished the end of the season and squad depth wise, and we'll get into kind of this offseason and what's been going on, but I'm not sure if they're quite ready to be back at that Champions League spot. I mean, just Leicester in general, you look at them as a team who, had that unbelievable campaign, wins the Premier League, all of a sudden has all these super high expectations. It's kind of just been chilling as a mid-table club, and then all of a sudden has this great start to the season. Fans expect to be, top four, expect to win the Prem again. But realistically, I think finishing fifth is only the second time Leicester has finished in the top six in the Prem ever. The first was when they won the title. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's obviously disappointing how the season ended, but you can't erase everything that was done before then. And also, it might be kind of a blessing to be put into the Europa League, where the stage is a little less big right away for going back into Europe.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like the part of it that I want to touch on early on is because of the midfield. Like if you look at players like Yuri Tielemans and Wilfred Ndidi, they're very solid players, but especially with someone like Tielemans and without Madison toward the latter part of the season, they can't seem to create and break down other teams. Like I know Man United kind of has the same problem before Pogba really comes back or Fernandes was really integrated. And in your case, it's just unfortunate situations where toward the end, like we're going to touch on depth later, but a lot of key players like Ricardo Pereira and also James Maddison have been out for quite some while, and then they just could not adapt to the style where everyone has tape on how Leicester would struggle to be on the front foot, and then kind of translating that into negative results. But then let's talk about transfers, which could be a short segment because there's not a lot of them. Big news, of course, Ben Chilwell is out. to Chelsea with a pretty hefty sum. But then you guys brought in a player that I personally really like, and I feel like a lot of I don't know, pundits or even just soccer fans have been really high on in Timothy Castagna from Atalanta. What are some of your early thoughts on basically, the team's transfer policy with this season? Of course, everyone's talking about the financial constraints as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Right away I saw that, Leicester going into Europe, you think you're gonna have a big budget. Leicester did not have a big budget at all this transfer window, and of course, selling Chilwell there freed up a lot of funds, and that was something that Ben Chilwell leaving was something that was coming for a couple years now. But finally moved on to Chelsea. But yeah, Castagna, he seems, from everything that I've seen with him, and I can't say I've watched too many Atalanta games, not necessarily watching them on a weekly basis, but from what I've seen from everything, really goes in really hard challenge and into tackles. Really impressed with how physical he is on the defensive side of the ball, but then also his ability to get forward. Most of his highlights are him whipping balls into the box, which is really impressive. I think it'll really fit Leicester's style of play really, really well. And overall, anytime you can sign someone who is 24, making appearances on their national team, he's obviously a very, very talented player, has that big game experience with Atalanta. So, I think overall, fantastic signing for Leicester to replace Chilwell. It's just, you would think there's going to be more for Leicester. You still have holes at center back that you probably could have filled. And Johnny Evans and Snushu have been fantastic, but again, just depth. You really only have 2 first-team center backs right now. Wes Morgan's doing his best on his old legs, but certainly not the way.
What about Ryan Bennett?
Yeah, and then Ryan Bennett, there's a very much a love-hate relationship with Ryan Bennett. There's some good things, but I don't think it's been enough to really cement himself as like the 3rd center back for Leicester. So you have that there, and Brendan Rodgers is also experimenting. This is also because there was a bunch of injuries through the lockdown period. But you're also still looking at a Leicester team that has not signed a replacement for Riyad Mahrez, and that happened many, many years ago now, and there still is yet to be a replacement at winger. So you're just kind of looking at this, and Leicester's done a really fantastic job of reinvesting its money. They're building a brand new training facility, which is absolutely beautiful, and it's going to be state of the art. But it's just, you're kind of looking at it at the right now as this team clearly does not have the depth to go into Europe and play 2 games a week. And it's just kind of interesting here as the transfer window winds down what's going to happen, because there's just some pieces, and I don't think Leicester needs like any big stars or anything to come in and completely flip everything. Would that be nice? Yes, but I don't think you really need that. Leicester really just needs some like solid depth players who they can fill in and who can play Sunday at Burnley and play well enough to get 3 points or to at least get a draw in that game to keep the momentum going. But also, as we saw during the lockout period, Leicester was without Maddison, Tielemans, and Chilwell. All 3 were out with injuries, and that's 3 of their best players were gone. And all of a sudden, for the last couple of games of the season, you had Luke Thomas playing left back, who was fresh out of the academy, who played really, really well, but fresh out of the academy. And at right back, you had James Justin, who was just signed from Luton Town from League Two. So, you have so much inexperience and coming up, and both players played well in the situations they were thrown into. It's just, I don't think you can expect these players, and most of them, that's something with Leicester this whole preseason, is they've shown a lot of youth in the preseason, a lot of players from the academy, and they've done well. It's just, it's not been enough to translate to the Prem or to the Europa League competition. And there's definitely some concerns there that Leicester fans are definitely getting a bit restless, just kind of waiting for something to happen.
So let's just move on to kind of like expectation stuff, because we actually skipped on talking on a player that you're impressed with, a player that you're falling off. Let's all group it into the expectation stuff, because you gotta address the depth. Like, Bennett's technically not on the team right now, even as a 3rd center back. He's kind of back with the Wolves. No one knows what's going to go on there. We talk about the wing backs. Castagna basically replaces Chilwell, although he's better on the right, and then you still got Justin and Luke Thomas as your backup. And there's a little bit of an uncertainty with the front 3. Like, what's the optimal setting? Like, Maddison probably plays a 10, but then what? Like, Demarai Gray, Harvey Barnes, Marco Brighton might still chip in. Jose Perez has been kind of disappointing, and Vardy's 32. Like, he can't play 38 games with his intensity. So, what are some of your early thoughts about, well, this current setup with kind of minimal change going into Europa League, where you have to play more matches than Champions League because there are more rounds, more teams, and all that. And what are your players? What are a player that you're kind of high on from the past season and really wants him to maintain in this season, but then also a player that's been kind of disappointing that you might want to see replaced or kind of demoted, at least in the role, from like a role standpoint?
I mean, first of all, I mean, you have to give some props to Jamie Vardy's 32-year-old legs. The fact that he can score 23 goals in the Premier League at that age. I mean, he really didn't show much of a sign of slowing down, but like you said, I mean, you can't expect him to do that in multiple competitions throughout the entire year. And I mean, that's a big question mark for Leicester. I think it's been a question mark for Leicester for the last couple of years now, as everyone knows that Jamie Vardy's been getting up in age, and it's who's going to be that next striker. I mean, Jose Perez was second on the team in goals in the Prem last season, but just with 8. It went from Jamie Vardy at 23 to Jose Perez at 8. And Jose Perez has been disappointing, I would say, but he's been very up and down. I mean, he was in a lot more scoring chances last year than to only have 8 goals, if that makes sense. He should have had way more than 8 goals in the positions that he was put in. So you look at that, and I mean, there's potential there for him to turn it around, have a big jump this offseason, and maybe become that next guy for Leicester. Then you also have Kelechi Iheanacho, who really was kind of written off for a couple of years. Came in, put in some good shifts, especially post-lockdown for Leicester. Leicester switched to 3 at the back pretty much post-lockdown for the whole time because of injuries. But we had Vardy and Iheanacho up top together as a strike pair, and they played really well together up there. So that might be something that Leicester could look to in the future, but I don't think he's the guy going forward to be the number 9. Like, he's not that guy. And then you mentioned winger-wise too. I mean, Jose Perez was brought in kind of as a center forward, has been moving out on the wing, is kind of comfortable there, not perfectly comfortable there. Harvey Barnes is someone who came up through the Leicester Academy. Everyone's really high on him. He's gotten some looks from the England national team as well, but just clinically his finishing is not there yet. And actually saw that in the preseason game on Saturday. He just is repeatedly getting into scoring positions and just was not scoring against Blackburn Rovers, which is not great. So just overall kind of there's just a lot of question marks, especially in the attack for Leicester. I mean, you also mentioned Demarai Gray, who has kind of been someone that might be kind of seen on his way out at Leicester almost. I mean, I don't think at times he hasn't been good enough to consistently be in the starting lineup. So I think Harvey Barnes is probably higher on my list as far as going into a winger role, but it's just, there's again, just a lot of question marks. Pre-lockdown, pre-injuries and everything, Leicester was running with Perez and Barnes as their main 2 wingers. Mark Albrighton still has a decent amount left in his tank, but once again, there's just not enough players to be that star guy. So if Leicester was going to bring in a big name player and recruit this star player, which I don't think they're in a position to do so from a financial standpoint or also from a just team where Leicester is at, they're not going to bring in one of these massive big name players, but it probably would be a winger. But yeah, just overall, like, good player. I mean, I think overall, I know we switched here on the attack for a second, but Kaglar Sanucci, I think, is probably my big player. He was fantastic last season, stepped in for Harry Maguire, no problems, really became a fan favorite right away, and has really just impressed. Just goes in, hard challengers, has a little fun on the ball at the back, which is good to see. So I think he was definitely the good player, definitely building off that. I mean, just him and Johnny Evans in general as a center back pairing were really, really good. But I think for my player to need improvement, I could go a lot of different areas with this. But I would say Youri Tielemans. He came to Leicester on a loan spell and was just exceptional. He looked like the player he was in FIFA career modes, to be honest with you. And then Leicester brought him in on a permanent deal. He was a record signing, still is the record signing. And in 37 appearances last year, he had 3 goals and 6 assists. And his game's not all about creating offensively. he does play more of a defensive role. But when Leicester was put in the situation, especially later in the year, you have a bunch of star players out. Teams are starting to sit back, say, break us down. This is where you expect Tielemans to shine and to start playing these balls and pinging them forward wide, to Vardy, wherever. And it just didn't really happen. He was a little slow on the ball at times, and it just wasn't all put together the way it should have been. Leicester kind of needed him to step up in that big star role last year, especially with Maddison out and everything, but he didn't. And so I'd say he's the player who probably needs the biggest improvement. And it's not that he was horrible. He was definitely played a good enough role. It's just when you have injuries and James Maddison is out and, Ricardo Pereira is out and some of these other big stars who are creating forward, you got to step up and do that. And Tielemans just kind of was absent at times.
Finally, as we're still on expectations, where do you see Leicester finishing both in the league and also in Europa League?
Yeah, Europa League's tough because we don't have a draw or anything yet. I don't know. I think just based on how the Europa League normally goes, I feel like Leicester can make it out of the group stage in Europe. I feel like they'll have enough to get through that. Then it really all depends on the draw. I could see them being a very, very early exit in the knockout stage of the Europa League. We'll go with that as we don't have groups yet. I mean, who knows, depending on their group. But as far as the Premier League, they're definitely not going to be challenging for a Champions League position next year. I just don't see that happening, which could open up a whole different can of worms for Leicester going forward. I would say they're probably in that 6th, 7th, 8th position next year, just based on how the post-lockdown period was, and based on preseason results this summer. It's just things haven't been clicking. It just hasn't been that exciting Leicester that was taking the field last September at this time. And it's just kind of hard to say that you think they're going to turn it around and fix it immediately as soon as the season starts, because they haven't really been showing signs of being able to do that. And just playing with more games and everything, I feel like that's a big load getting added for Leicester. So I feel like we're not going to see them challenging in a Champions League spot next year, especially because I do think a bunch of the traditional top 6 have made big jumps this transfer window, especially. I'm looking at Chelsea as a wild card. But just like a lot of teams have gotten a lot better and have added a lot of pieces to make you excited about them. And Leicester really hasn't done that. There's been no change here that would make you think, yeah, they're going to be in a Champions League spot next year. So I think it'll be another fight for Europa League. I think Leicester and Wolves will have another battle, as it seems that they normally do at this point. But I would say somewhere in the 6th through 8th range in the Prem for Leicester next year, which who knows could be, the point where, James Maddison says, I want to leave. And then some of these other players, Ricardo Pereira as well, could say, I want to leave, based on where Leicester finishes and they want European football.
All right, that's all the time we have for today. I'll actually be back with more of this series with another bunch of my friends, but most of all, thank you very much, Ben, for hopping on and talking Leicester.
Yeah, no problem, man. Anytime.